When you switch to Frontier Gig Service, you don't have to worry about your internet dropping out at the worst possible times. And you can talk to friends and present in work meetings without sounding like this. Seriously, no more of that nonsense. Change to fiber. Change to better. Upgrade to Frontier Gig Service on our 100% fiber network for $69.99 and get a $300 Visa reward card on us. Exclusive offer for qualified households only. Go to frontier.com/FLFiber for complete offer details. Service is subject to availability and all applicable terms and conditions.
This is Legal Live with Eddie and Chuck Farah. They're talking the latest legal news and answering your questions. To call Legal Live and ask Eddie and Chuck a question, grab your phone and dial 855-765-1045. That's 855-765-1045.
Welcome. You're listening to Legal Live, brought to you by Farah and Farah on 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. I'm your host, Sheifalika Botnagar, and today, live in studio, I'm joined by Tom Carrero, and we've got Chuck Farah. Almost forgot your name, Chuck. My bad.
That's okay. It won't be the first time.
How are you gentlemen doing today?
We're good.
Great. Thank you.
We're good. Yeah. We're glad to be here. How you been?
I'm doing really well. All
right. We also have Talia in the studio, Talia Carrero, who's our backup.
We do.
That's right.
That's my 9-year-old. She was super excited to be here today, so she got up nice and early, put her makeup on, got dressed, and she's ready to be here. So
all right.
We're good to go.
She looks great.
We're here.
So, gentlemen, what's on the docket
for
today?
Today, we're going to talk about motorcycles and motorcycle accidents and how they're different from automobile accidents. And the reason why we decided to talk about that subject today is because the firm has now joined an organization called Law Tigers. And Law Tigers is an organization made up of law firms who specialize in motorcycle accidents. And, it is a specialty. It's different. It's a different type of client. It's a different type of law that applies. And it, typically these accidents, unfortunately, can result in some serious injuries. And
That's
so
true.
we've decided, we've always handled motorcycle accidents. We're always trying to learn more and get better as a firm. And so we decided to join this organization called Law Tigers. And Tom Carrero is an expert pretty much in motorcycle accidents. He's an avid motorcycle driver. He knows a lot about motorcycles. And so we're here to talk about that today.
All right.
Tom, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been practicing 27 years this December, so I got out of law school pretty young, and basically licensed in 3 states, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Florida. Been practicing in Florida full-time since 2004, and I have a lot of experience not only litigating motorcycle cases, but unfortunately my father was in a really bad motorcycle accident when I had first gotten out of law school.
Oh, my goodness.
So one of the first cases I had ever litigated was my dad's, and so I've seen it. I've seen the issues from the family side, from a personal side, from the emotional side, from the financial side, and then also from the legal sides. And, because I've been riding, I think my dad bought me my first mini bike. I probably was about 10 years old, and I got some pictures of myself on that thing. So I've been just riding a long time, and it's just a different kind of camaraderie. It's a different kind of client, as Chuck said. And
I would think that knowing how to ride a motorcycle, understanding how it works, has a lot to do with how you prosecute a case for somebody who's been injured in an accident. Because you always hear defenses from the other side. Oh, maybe they could have avoided it. Maybe, the headlights were on, and they, or the headlights weren't on, or there are different defenses that can come up in a case. But understanding a motorcycle is very important from the lawyer's point of view so that he can overcome those defenses. Wouldn't you agree with that? Is that something that comes into play often?
Yeah, actually, that's completely on point. We have a client currently who, when we got the police report, in motorcycle cases, when the motorcycle driver is involved in it. 9 times out of 10, the motorcyclist is knocked unconscious, is immediately, taken, unfortunately, to a hospital. And so when a police officer gets there, they're not really questioning the motorcycle rider. They get their side of the story. It usually goes right to the other driver that was involved in it. And so in the case we have recently, when I got the police report, I had seen that it said that the motorcyclist was driving without his headlight on. So when I reached out to the client and I said, what's this about you not riding a headlight on? Because motorcycles generally can't turn the headlights off. They're either low beam or high beam. They're always running. So I couldn't wrap my head around this. And he said, no, didn't do anything to the motorcycle. Nothing was done. And that was fine. I expected the other driver to say that because that was a defense. But then there had an independent witness also on the police report that said he was driving without a headlight. And I just could not wrap my head around it. And so make a long story short, I was like, well, we requested the body cam footage. And when we got the body cam footage, the police officer walked up to the quote unquote independent witness and said, I understand you're a witness to the accident. Tell me what you saw. And he says on the body cam footage, I didn't see anything. I just heard the accident. So that somehow made it into the report that he had corroborated, the other driver's version of it, that he was driving without a headlight, which obviously was not true. So
that's such a huge find on your part. Now, of course, you're going to be able to help the client out because, and this brings up kind of an off topic here about the admissibility of accident reports in a court of law. There's a rule of law that says that you can't use the accident report to prove who's responsible for an accident. So, you can't admit that document, that report in front of a jury and have them rely on it to determine who's at fault because it's hearsay, and generally hearsay is not admissible in court. And so I think this is a lesson for our listeners because, if you get ticketed or if you find that you think that maybe you're responsible, because the report says so, it's important to get a lawyer involved because a lawyer can investigate it. And maybe turn it around and really find the truth because sometimes the report isn't always accurate.
100%. Yeah,
that's really interesting. I didn't realize that the report wouldn't be admissible in court because it's just hearsay testimony.
Exactly.
Well, and I gave you a great example as to why it's not admissible because they're not very reliable.
They're not reliable.
Right. Yeah, they're not.
And so it's important to talk with witness. And that goes back to I'm kind of skipping around here, but it goes back to having knowledge about motorcycles because different models have different features, and if you know about it, then you know how to prosecute the case, and it helps to prosecute the case that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And, we can get into the type of coverages that motorcycles are required to have. You want to kind of get into that a little bit, Tom? Like the type of, are there coverages, insurance coverages required by motorcyclists?
Yeah, there are. And it's quite different from a auto case. And most motorcyclists, unfortunately, are either misled or just don't understand the actual differences, especially when they're relying on their insurance company to tell them or to try to sell them a particular product. So it's really important to discuss that.
Yeah.
I think that's a great topic. We should dive further into the coverage and insurances when we get back from this break. What do you guys say?
Perfect.
I'm all for it.
All right. Roll it, Daniel. You've been listening to Legal Live, brought to you by Farah and Farah on 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. We'd love to hear from you today, so give us a call at 855-765-1045. We'll be right back after this quick break. Welcome back. You're listening to Legal Live, brought to you by Farah and Farah on 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. Give us a call at 855-765-1045. We're talking about motorcycles today. We were just touching on the coverage. Tom, take it away.
Yeah, I wanted to touch base on this, and it may seem a little dry, but for a motorcyclist, it's actually, this is really important because it's going to be applicable to everyone that's riding here. In Florida, when you have an automobile, it's a no-fault state. So basically, if you get in a car accident, you have something called personal injury protection. It covers, without getting into the minutia of it, 80% of your medical bills up to $10,000, and that's in every case. And then there's something called bodily injury coverage. So bodily injury coverage is what the other driver is carrying on their vehicle. So when you go and you're hurt in an accident as the result of somebody else's negligence, you're subject to their bodily injury coverages. So in Florida, this is, one of the fewer states that does not require a driver to have any bodily injury coverage. Yeah. And when they do, the minimum is only $10,000. So what does that mean? That means if you're hit by a driver and they're at fault for your accident and they're driving around with zero bodily injury coverage, you're not claiming any. Your lawyer can't do basically much for you at that point. There's exceptions to that, of course. You still want to call your lawyer, and you want to discuss these things with them. But even if there's a $10K policy, if there's a $10,000 policy, that's what you're limited to is your recovery. So how you can protect yourself from that? There is a way to do that, and that is you have something called uninsured motorist coverage.
So right, I've heard Chuck talk about that.
We have, but yeah. So I just kind of want to talk about BI a little, bodily injury liability. So someone can legally drive a vehicle in the state of Florida and only have PIP coverage and not have liability coverage and still be legal in the state to drive.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Yes. And that's very unusual because, like Tom says, most states aren't like that. Most states require drivers to carry liability coverage. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's kind of, people may remember that last year or year before, there was a bill in front of the governor that would have made bodily injury liability coverage mandatory. Mm-hmm. And he decided not to sign it. But it passed Congress and landed on his desk, but for some reason it wasn't signed. But yeah, I mean, that's a risk. You're driving around. You can't depend on the other driver to have the coverage to compensate you if you're injured in an accident.
Right. And for a motorcyclist, that problem is compounded because also in Florida, you're not required to have any insurance on your motorcycle. So you can have a motorcycle and have no insurance whatsoever. So when you buy a motorcycle, you say, hey, great, I had a car. My car insurance was $2,000 a year. Now I got this great bike, and I don't have to pay anything in insurance.
Oh, no. Wait a minute. What?
Yeah, it is. That's the quirk to this. You may want to repeat that because it's important.
Sure. When you're a motorcyclist in Florida, Florida does not require you to carry any insurance on that motorcycle. Now, if you're buying a new motorcycle and it's financed, that's a different story because your finance company is going to dictate what kind of insurance you have to have. But if you go out and you buy a bike and it's paid for and you're driving it around, you do not have to have any insurance whatsoever. And for a rider that doesn't understand the law, that's great to them. They don't have to pay that insurance policy. Well, that's not great when you get in an accident because now you've been deprived of you're solely looking to whatever that at-fault driver has in insurance. And again, that could be zero.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times it is zero. And then there's no PIP. It's not like people get confused, If you're involved in an automobile, okay, let's say that you were involved in an accident on a motorcycle. You have no coverage on it. I mean, you're legal because it doesn't require any coverage. Let's say you own a vehicle, an automobile that's parked in your garage with PIP coverage. Can you get the PIP off of that one?
No. There's almost always an exclusion on those auto policies that they will exclude anything that's there's again complicated, but it's usually how many wheels, if it's under 4 wheels, if it's under gross tonnage, all these things are going to, and that's specifically there to exclude you from getting around a loophole and having coverage that you're not paying for.
Exactly.
I see.
And what's crazy about this is that you could be a pedestrian walking down the street and get hit by a car. Mm-hmm. Well, if you own a motor vehicle, an automobile, and it's parked in your garage or somewhere else, and you have PIP coverage on that, the PIP coverage on that automobile will cover you as a pedestrian.
What?
But it won't cover you as a motorcycle driver.
My goodness. Wow.
I mean, that's
had
why
no
it's
idea.
different.
And understand what that means. I mean, the PIP is covering your medical bills. So you're a pedestrian or you're a motorcyclist, I mean, almost exclusively the injuries for a motorcyclist is going to be much more substantial than the auto driver. Or likewise, a pedestrian. You know, if you're getting hit by a car, whether you're on a motorcycle or walking or riding your bike, your injuries are going to be substantial. And now you're not going to have, not only are you going to be injured, you're probably going to miss work. You're probably going to have lingering problems, and now you're going to have medical bills piling up that you're not going to have any coverage for whatsoever.
My goodness.
In this situation.
Yeah, it can be devastating. It can ruin somebody.
That is,
that
is so interesting.
It's really a law that I really don't understand it. They don't, And then there was the law about the helmets when you're riding a motorcycle. Wasn't there like a change in the law there?
Well, that's what also makes this different. Most riders, especially if you're not really from Florida, maybe and you're coming down for the wintertime, or you're transient, you're a snowbird, whatever you want to call it. People say, oh, Florida's a no helmet law state, and that's partially true. So in Florida, you don't have to wear a helmet when you're riding your motorcycle. But what most people don't understand is that there's a caveat to that. Number one, you have to be over 21 years of age. And then number two, you also have to have a $10,000 medical policy coverage, which most people don't understand that. They come down, they're driving down from Virginia or wherever, and it's a helmet state. They come down, they get to Florida, boom, the helmet comes off, it goes in the saddlebag, and they're driving around. And they don't understand that. That's technically not legal in all cases. So now not only are you subjecting yourself to more injury, but you're also, as far as the bodily injury coverage goes, your injuries are much more likely to be more severe without your helmet than with your helmet. So now that it just exacerbates the problem of not having adequate underinsured motorist coverage and insurance coverage on the motorcycle.
So yeah, that's when if you don't want to wear a helmet and you're over 21, I'm not quite sure. So if you're under 21, you're required to wear a helmet.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Okay. Over 21, you don't have to wear a helmet, but you better have $10,000 in medical coverage. Now, is that health insurance, or is that a separate policy that you would purchase through an auto carrier or a motorcycle insurer?
Yeah, it would be medical coverage. So you would have it through your insurer. You would have when you have insurance, people always say full coverage, but they don't really understand what that means. So when you have a policy, that has a medical pay coverage as well. So generally that's, a minimum of $5,000 if you carry that. So what that means is if you're in a motorcycle accident and you have medical coverage, since you don't have PIP, so you don't have a policy automatically paying your $10,000 of medicals, your medical coverage would kick in and pay for that. So that would cover you. But most people don't understand that. And honestly, Chuck, I've been doing this so long, and I can't even recall ever having a police officer know that and see that on a police report, or somebody saying, hey, the guy didn't have a helmet on, and also I'm citing him because he didn't have his $10,000 of medical coverage. So that's a technicality, but that's why
it will come into play, though.
Oh, absolutely.
I was going to lead into that, because if your client comes in and he's under 21 and he didn't have his helmet on, now you're talking about, maybe a reduction in damages, or even, is that considered like comparative negligence? And I know that's a legal term that maybe our listeners aren't real familiar with, but does it fall into the comparative negligence argument?
Yeah, basically what that means is that the other side, so the other insurance company, the driver, the at-fault driver, is going to say, hey, yeah, okay, we may have caused the accident, but by the way, your guy was violating the law. He didn't have his helmet on. So they're going to try to do anything that they can to diminish the value of that motorcyclist claim.
Yeah.
Based on that percentage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we're getting ready to take a break, but
Yeah,
I think
we are.
we can kind of carry into that and then talk about how you can protect yourself as a motorcyclist.
Yeah, I think that'll be really interesting. And I've got a couple of questions from a layman's point of view. What does PIP mean? What is comparative coverage defined as? But this
Bring
is
it
really
on.
interesting so far. Yeah, I will absolutely ask you all the questions. Give us a call at 855-765-1045 if you have questions about riding motorcycles. You're listening to Legal Live, brought to you by Farah and Farah on 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. We'll be right back after this quick break. Welcome back. You're listening to Legal Live, brought to you by Farah and Farah on 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. I'm Sheifalika, and I'm joined by Chuck and Tom today. We're talking about motorcycles and coverage. Give us a call if you've got a bike and you've got a question. 855-765-1045. Take it away, Chuck.
Yes, thanks, Sheifalika. Tom, right before the break, we were talking about the helmet law in Florida. And, if somebody violates that law, even though maybe they were not at fault in causing the accident, maybe they were stopped at a stop sign and a vehicle rear ends them, let's say, and they're thrown off the motorcycle and they injured, they have a brain injury or something.
Oh, my goodness.
In that situation, if you're not following the law, the helmet law, then you got problems, right?
Yeah, I don't want to I don't want to be jaded or sound but insurance companies, are really not in the business of paying claims. So when things like this happen, in a motorcycle case, almost always it's the motorcyclist that was paying attention. It was a driver that was on their phone that just didn't see them, didn't hear them for whatever reason. The property damage on the motorcycle is always going to be exponentially more than the car, and the physical injuries are going to be. So when an insurance company's looking at that, they're saying, well, yeesh, we're going to be on the hook for something here. How can we get out of that? How can we get around that? And the first thing they're going to look at is saying, hey, was this guy wearing a helmet? Was this girl wearing a helmet? And if they weren't, and they were supposed to be because they weren't following the law, I can guarantee you that they're going to attack down that avenue. And they're going to say, your injuries wouldn't have been severe if you had your helmet on like you were supposed to, and things like that. So,
right. So numbers, let's say that, that case goes to a trial and a jury thinks that the case is worth $1 million. But they put 70% of comparative negligence on the client. You basically take $1 million verdict and it reduces to $300,000 because they'll reduce it by the 70%. And that's basically what happens in a comparative negligence situation. And, that hurts when, I think, when you've got major injuries like that, and you're only partially compensated just by not wearing a helmet, it hurts.
And I think people, a lot of people from different states, their laws are different. So, in Florida, it's really a truly comparatively negligent state, which means if they find out that you're 99% responsible for the case, you're taking that, you know what I mean? You're losing all of that coverage basically. So
exactly,
it's people need to really, especially in this day and age with the internet and things, if you're going to reliable websites, you're reading reliable blogs, you're calling us as attorneys to ask for, legal advice. That's what you need to do. You need to be informed. And a lot of people are not informed, and they need to be.
Yeah, right. And well, that's why we're part of Law Tigers, to make people informed, and I'm excited about being part of this, our firm being part of this organization with Tom Carrero here leading the way with that and handling these types of cases in our firm.
Yeah,
but
I think,
I know that there's a way you can protect yourself through, and you mentioned it earlier, through uninsured motorist coverage or underinsured motorist coverage. Do you want to I think you got a story to wrap around that to let our listeners know of the impact of not having it or of having it.
Yeah, I know lawyers have a tendency to want to tell these war stories that really nobody likes except for other lawyers, and even then I don't know if other lawyers even like them. But in this particular case, because we've talked about a lot of technicalities and nuances, I think a story will truly relate the impact that this all has in a real life situation. So I had a client that was involved in a motorcycle accident, and we won't get into all the details, but somebody else was at fault for the accident, and he ends up losing his leg below the knee. It's basically cut off in the accident.
My goodness.
And now, as you can imagine, again, without getting into details, this is completely life-altering. You now no longer have the use of a limb, and a pretty important limb, I'd say, your leg.
Yeah,
And,
I like all my limbs.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have all your limbs, but it's not something like if you're a construction worker and you lose a pinky that you still can work. When you lose a leg, depending on what you do and depending how your life is, it makes a pretty major impact on that. And so the at-fault driver ends up having a $10,000 bodily injury policy,
Wow.
and the driver, our motorcyclist, does not have coverage.
That's no cover. I mean, that's nothing. That does nothing for the person.
So let's say what that is now. So he loses his leg below the knee, and his recovery is $10,000 for losing a limb due to someone else's negligence.
Wow. Yeah, from my understanding, it's not always the motorcyclists that are at fault. It's not this typical stereotype of them rushing between cars or speeding up in and out of traffic on the freeway. Sometimes it's just a driver in a vehicle or a truck just doesn't see them turning a corner, and they run right into them or they come at them. Like,
Well, I think that's probably more often than not.
yeah, and just a
that
little
they're
love
just-
bump from a car can send a motorcycle
That's
to the
right.
ground.
You're absolutely right.
And
And
you also have to remember, you're driving a motorcycle, you're using your left hand, you're using your right hand, you're using your left foot and your right foot. So you're not playing on your phone.
Right.
You driving on the highway and you're looking at the cars next to you, you can see, a lot of people playing around on their phones, playing with things in the car.
That is so true. I
Talking
just
to
realized
someone.
that.
In the motorcycle, you're not talking to somebody next to you. You have you're going on speed on the motorcycle.
Right.
You're not using your hands to do anything else but operate the vehicle. And so as Chuck said, I think way more often than not, it's the other driver and not the motorcyclist that's at fault for an accident.
yeah, because when you're in an automobile, you have this sense of security. I mean, you feel like there's more protection. You can be, your attention can be diverted. But a motorcyclist has to keep focus because he's working with all four limbs. And it's a more focused way of driving.
Which is
Yeah.
part of the beauty of and the freedom of having a motorcycle and driving it. But a vehicle, we take our driving for granted.
Right.
We're not really, even if we hit something or a curb or something, it's not going to send us flying. It's not going to harm us.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, so, uninsured motorist coverage, that's the way you can protect yourself, but you got to go buy it because it's not mandatory. It's coverage that is very valuable, and it's relatively cheap, too. When you go price out uninsured or underinsured motorist coverage on your auto policy or your motorcycle policy, you'll find that it's
Affordable.
very affordable and very reasonable.
Wow, that's good to know.
It is. And so can you buy an uninsured motorist policy on a motorcycle?
Yes, you can. And one of the other problems I find oftentimes too is, and I'm not here to bash insurance companies, but
They
most
suck. It's okay. We all know it.
Most insurance companies and salespersons do not fully advise the client, hey, by the way, for an extra $75, you can have an uninsured motorist policy added to this, because it's
see.
not to their benefit for you to have that. That in fact exposes them to liability. Let's relate this back to the story I just told you about the guy that lost his leg. Okay, in that particular case, had he had an insurance policy, he's able to select the level of uninsured motorist coverage that he wants to pay for. So basically what that means is he's paying to protect himself in case someone else causes him injury and does not have bodily injury coverage, or has 10,000, or maybe they have even 100,000, but the injuries are worth $1 million. So he's able to add that. So what happens is, in those cases, he actually goes to his own insurance company and says, hey, yeah, that guy hit me and only had 10,000, but I lost my leg. I have 100,000 in uninsured motorist coverage. I want my $100,000.
Right.
And then that becomes another part of it. So that's why it's and I can't impress how important it is for motorcyclists here to have coverage. That has to be a priority. You're protecting your own self from someone else's incompetence.
Yeah. I mean, part of the issue, I think, is now you can just go buy a policy. Or first of all, it's common, well, I wouldn't say common knowledge, but if you buy a motorcycle, you know that insurance coverage is not required. So that's not a good start right from the beginning, because people are thinking, well, I just bought this brand new bicycle or motorcycle, or I just bought this used one. It's new to me, but it's used. I don't have to have coverage. I can save some money. But that's really short-sighted. And but part of the problem is that if you do want to buy coverage, You can go online and not even deal with anybody and not get any advice from anybody about what type of coverage you should buy. So, it's an issue.
I think that's a great point, actually, Chuck. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, because you want to consult. If you had a broker, an insurance broker that
Yeah.
you could go talk to, and those people are kind of becoming obsolete because now you can go online and just buy it through a couple of clicks. You'll have coverage. But it's important to speak with people who know about insurance coverages so that you can make sure that you're completely covered. We offer that service.
Yeah.
We'll talk to anybody about the type of coverage they should buy.
Really?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
I have questions about that. That's great, because your insurance company's not going to tell you all these things.
Right.
I think that's a great idea. So you've heard it here live on Legal Live, brought to you by Farah and Farah, that if you need some extra advice on getting the best insurance coverage for you, reach out to Farah and Farah. They've got your back. Give us a call at 855-765-1045. We're going to head to a quick break, and we'll be right back to wrap this up. We'd love to hear from you. Welcome back. You're listening to Legal Live, brought to you by Farah and Farah on 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. I'm Sheifalika, and I'm joined today by Chuck Farah and Tom Carrero. Let's go straight to Tom. Let's see what you do.
Let me ask Tom something real quick. So,
Okay.
Tom, take us through when you take on a case. Client calls you and says, I was on a motorcycle. I've been involved in an accident. I'm injured. Take us through your process. What you would do to get the maximum compensation you can for that client.
Well, the first thing I want to say is it's important to call us as soon as the accident happens, as soon as you're able to. Again, what most people don't know is the other driver's insurance company can call you when you're laying in a hospital bed. Farah and Farah, any other attorney, excuse me, we cannot call you. You have to call us. We're not permitted to call you by the rules. But insurance companies can. They can take recordings. They can, when you're not in a shape to do so. So the sooner you call an attorney and the attorney is going to represent you, they're not allowed to talk to you anymore. So we can nip that in the bud initially. Secondly, again, going back to the inaccuracies often found in police reports and things, I personally, my paralegal and I generally go out to the scene. We take our own photographs because there's things that I'm looking at that even a police officer is not thinking from a liability standpoint. Maybe even your family member that goes out there and takes a few photographs. They're not thinking of what's important, what's not important. Excuse me. So we go out there and we do that. We see what the medical conditions are. We automatically find out what kind of coverages we have. We have Farah and Farah's in-house investigators that we also send out to go. I mean, in particular cases, I have them go out and check all the businesses for security cam footage so I can verify that with the police reports.
Nice.
I'm telling you, I mean, in a weird way, one of the most exciting times for me as a lawyer handling a case when I take on a new case is going to the scene. Because I know that going to the scene brings it's real life. I can now envision exactly how this accident occurred because you're going through the movement, the direction of the vehicles and the motorcycle or whatever, and you're actually seeing it happen right in front of you because there are other cars driving through the road and you can see. And it really brings it uncovers all questions for the lawyer when it comes to liability, in my opinion. I mean, I used to get I get really excited about going to the scene of the accident.
I can see how passionate you are about that, actually. I think that that's a really smart move as well. And to pull cameras if they're available, like Tom said.
Oh, yeah.
By the
Everything's being videotaped these days.
Yeah, I know. That's terrifying. But yes, it is true. It's 2022. We've got a caller on the line, guys.
Okay.
Richard from Jacksonville. You want to discuss some rear-end collisions. What's going on, Richard?
Hey, I do agree with you totally about drivers of cars not paying attention and either run into each other or run into motorcycles. But what I see a whole lot of around Jacksonville are motorcyclists who think that 295 is an obstacle course, and they're weaving in and out of traffic and And matter of fact, the last accident I saw was a guy weaving in around me, and then all of a sudden traffic comes to a stop because he had run into the back of a car, and you could see the imprint of his motorcycle on the rear bumper of the car. So I just wish there was some way to get a hold of these guys and let them see how dangerous they are.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point.
Well,
I mean, you know, it's responsible driving no matter what you're operating. You know, aren't there classes, Tom, that people can take on? Maybe you can get into that a little
absolutely, motorcycle safety courses, but just to touch on that a minute, I mean, I think this is a sort of a misconception, Richard. You know, you're seeing maybe a few of those guys, but for every few of those guys that are on a really fast, you know, Japanese-made bike and they're weaving in and out of traffic and they're driving without a helmet and they have a T-shirt on and don't have proper riding gear, you know, there's 1,000 guys and girls out there that know what they're doing, that are driving responsibly, that have the proper equipment on, that have been trained, that have taken motorcycle safety courses, that have educated themselves on visibility and sound and the driving of it. So it's hard to generalize that, but you know, absolutely. I mean, if you're riding a motorcycle, you're responsible for your riding just as if you're driving your car. You know, if you're doing things reckless on your motorcycle, it's not going to be easy for anyone to have sympathy for you, including a jury, including, you know, a police officer, including the other drivers, including the insurance companies. So, I mean, that's going to be a personal decision that drivers are making when they're out there. But, I mean, you know, 1,000%, you're going to have, you know, a few bad apples doing it. It shouldn't spoil the whole bunch for people that are responsible riders.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand that. I know recently I just covered a story for JSO tackling illegal street racing, not just in vehicles, but motorcycles as well. And it's a problem that Jacksonville does have right now. So, you know, I hear you, Richard.
We have these long stretches.
We do.
295, you got Butler Boulevard.
We do.
You know, it's a long stretch.
Some people have that fast and furious mentality, and they feel the need for speed, and they just want to go fast. And I think that sometimes...
Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. I've come across Buckman late at night, and all of a sudden the traffic will slow down, and then you'll hear some foghorn or something take off, and all of a sudden all these motorcycles are taking off because they back the traffic up so they can have the whole length of the Buckman Bridge to themselves, and they take off racing and all this kind of crazy stuff.
Wow, I'm gonna call my point of contact to JSO, let them know Buckman Bridge. That's a 3-mile bridge. I mean, I can see how that could be fun, but that's incredibly dangerous.
Well, thanks for calling, Richard. Yep.
Yes.
All right.
Take care.
So we've got just a few more moments.
Yeah. So as a lawyer handling these, would you kind of preserve the motorcycle? Is that important to you when you take on a case, Tom?
Yeah, in any kind of case, it's important to have that documented. Again, when you're in a motorcycle accident, you know, you're generally going to be pretty busted up. You're not thinking of getting your cell phone out of your saddlebag while you're laying there in the street with something, you know, hanging off of you to take pictures of the motorcycle. So the sooner that those photographs can be taken, the sooner we can see the scene. You know, they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. I mean, just put in your mind what it actually means to actually be there, and not only a picture, but you're standing there where the accident happened. You could smell gasoline on the ground. You can see skid marks. You can see the lines of sight. I mean, just things you cannot get by a photograph or a drawing on a police report. You know, you just it's
makes all the difference.
Compare them. Absolutely,
makes all the difference when you're handling these cases. Visiting the scene as soon as you can. I mean, and you can't be there like minutes after because, you know, you're probably not retained at that point. But soon after, within a day or two, you can still get out there and still see the debris and the evidence that was left by the accident.
I've been out there a few days after an accident. I've still found the guy's sunglasses laying there and his gloves. I mean, all kinds of things are still laying there on the road.
My goodness. Wow. Wow. Well, thank you guys so much. This was a really fascinating conversation. I've never really sat down and thought this much about motorcycle safety and riding and insurance and coverage. So thank you so much for all the listeners for calling in. You've been listening to Legal Live, brought to you by Farah and Farah on 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. We'll be back next week at noon, so give us a shout then. Thank you so much for listening.
When you switch to Frontier Gig Service, you don't have to worry about your internet dropping out at the worst possible times. And you can talk to friends and present in work meetings without sounding like this. Seriously, no more of that nonsense. Change to fiber. Change to better. Upgrade to Frontier Gig Service on our 100% fiber network for $69.99 and get a $300 Visa reward card on us. Exclusive offer for qualified households only. Go to frontier.com/FLfiber for complete offer details. Service is subject to availability and all applicable terms and conditions.